Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Grace Hour Show, a Christian program that takes a dive into our daily challenges and helps us learn our faith in a practical way. My name is Liz Robbins, and I'm joined by my co-host, Roger Robbins, in the studio.
Hey.
And we're excited to be here live with you today.
Yeah, it's Friday.
Yes, it's Friday. Happy Friday, everyone.
No one is working for the weekend today. No. Yes, we are. We're working for the weekend. We are excited about the weekend. Come on.
We are excited to be here. This week has been a really cool week. As a resident nerd here at Greater Grace, I love when we get into science, and all week has been enjoying the intersection of faith and science. If you have not tuned in to the episodes that have already happened this week, and this is a topic that interests you, I really recommend it. We had an incredible privilege of interviewing Dr. Thomas Clark, who's an atomic physicist, and that aired on Monday. If you haven't watched it, please do. Really amazing. So today we're ending the week, and really we're just going to spend some time enjoying what we've kind of titled as seeing God's fingerprints in nature. And that is, A.W. Tozer said that all nature has come to expect from God a sense of orderliness. Whatever God does carries with it his fingerprint. And so we want to enjoy considering where we can see God's fingerprints in nature, and hopefully just spend some time worshiping God through this topic.
I mean,
that's the whole point.
Oh, that's a great quote from A.W. Tozer. And it's kind of like saying that everything that's been created by the hand and voice of God is acknowledging God. And it's such a beautiful thing when all of creation cries out, you are God, you are holy, we lift you up. And as human beings, we can do the same.
Yeah.
And we've experienced that. I think just taking a walk, outside in the morning. It's really cold right now here in Baltimore, but taking that little walk around the block, getting outside, getting the fresh air you need in the most simple way, leaving your phone behind and just taking it in, a sunrise, a sunset. Yeah. Yesterday we saw the sunset over Baltimore, and it was this intense, almost crimson, but also fiery orange. Yeah. It was just the most,
beautiful.
Not a color.
It made you stop and look.
Yeah, it wasn't a color from the TV screen. It wasn't a pixel.
Yeah.
It wasn't one of those from a palette in a paint sample. It was God's color.
Yeah.
And it was God just telling us, here I am today. I remain the same.
Yeah.
And so Colossians 1 as a verse maybe we can use as a guideline for our discussion. And it says in verse 16 of Colossians 1, "For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him." All things were created through him and for him. So there is this amazing privilege you and we all get to have in our short little life on earth, where we get to see God's expression through what he's created.
Yeah.
And I think for all of us, we all remember at a young age, I remember the first time I went to the beach, and I remember seeing waves. I remember the distinct taste of salt, the feeling of sand in my toes, the smell of that sea, the air of the sea.
Yeah.
And then just being the waves, they don't stop.
Yeah.
And what makes this happen? And what is causing this? And, the curiosity within us that we were made for eternity. We are made yearning to understand this beauty. Yeah. So today we're going to hit a lot of little, what would you say? We want to, we're saying that God has revealed himself, and we from this verse, we can see it's both visible and invisible.
Right.
So there's both things that we can tangibly and factually, and like we can calculate them and we can measure them, but then there's still the mystery. There's the invisible things.
Well, I think that, when we were talking with Dr. Thomas earlier in the week about this, that was something to hear from someone of his caliber in terms of his knowledge of the universe. I mean, he's studying atoms and the particles of light,
right.
And to hear him say that actually science is not quite the equation that maybe we thought, that there is still so much unknown and so much mystery that should lead us to a place of humility.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned that that's a really good place for us to start, even as those of us if you consider yourself a researcher, an intellectual, someone who likes to dig deep into things, that always our posture should be one of humility. And what that means is that we recognize that there is a limit to what we can know, but that God wants us to enjoy this search. He wants us to enjoy it, and it should lead us to worship.
Yes.
This unknown, the mystery, that moment where you're just struck, you're awestruck. That is it. Like, that leads us to worship. If your next step, when you look at that flower or that sunset or the ocean, leads you to worship,
right.
then God is pleased with our curiosity, and he's pleased with our desire to know.
Because God's intention is for him to leave fingerprints. Like, it was his design to leave his trail, to leave his tracks.
And let's not lose that. Like, I think of the word wonder, like that, kids, they'll it's so hard to go on a walk with a toddler where you just could walk from one place to another without stopping. You can't do that with a toddler, because they're going to see a leaf and they're going to stop in their tracks, and they're going to be look at that. And then there's going to be an ant walking by, and they are going to get up close and look at them. And they're going to be full of wonder. And as we age, it's very often the case that we lose our wonder. And a friend of mine posted a reel, and it was me out in nature, and it showed a flower, and then it was wow. And then it showed wow. And that there's some of us who have held on to that wonder. And I think that's hopefully what I want to do today, is encourage us and the listeners to get back to that place of wonder, where when they see that thing that cries out to them, touches that part of them, that it would lead them to worship,
Yes.
And we want to cultivate wonder.
Yes.
So we're gonna nerd out a little bit in some ways, but hopefully the point of this is to lead us to the feet of Jesus, where we're just worshiping.
And maybe as a preface too, we can also what will get us there is the word you said, humility. I thought about this verse, Psalm 69:32. It says, when the humble see it, they will be glad. You who seek God, let your hearts revive. The humble, they'll see it.
Yeah.
And when they see it, it will revive them. I think there is something about the humble heart seeing the sunset and the rolling waves, and the butterfly and the flower, and knowing and just placing it in its order and going, that's God. That then revives the heart of us, the heart of man, the heart of us. And it gives us really I would say, maybe it revives us in the sense of life, because without this reviving, like you were saying, the child seems to be insatiably this is so, that curiosity is beaming, right?
Yeah.
But then as we get older, we get bored. And that's so sad, because there's a lifelessness there, right? I fear that I would stop being curious or be lacking wonder. And I think it really has to do with humility. Lord, when I went on walks with my dad would be before we start our walk, let's ask the Lord to reveal himself in nature. And I was like,
That's cool.
like, what are you talking about, Dad?
And your dad
Like,
loves nature.
oh, he loves nature.
He went to forestry school.
He went to a forestry school, and he geeked out about trees.
Yeah.
That's all he cared about, and plants. And you know what? I remember many times, not all the times, but many times we would pray, and then there would be that animal, and that would be this cool thing that we found in a tree or in a river or on the road, a rock or something.
Well, and I think, so in Romans, there's another awesome verse, and this is kind of the opposite of that Psalm verse. This is what can happen when you don't have humility.
Yeah.
And it says in verse 20, it says, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God and give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. And this is the warning to this age. We are in the age of knowledge. This is the time of technology is making huge leaps and bounds in what we know about the universe. We're hoping to unleash AI in order to find cures for cancer. And we've got all this potential knowledge that is flooding in. And the warning here is that claiming to be wise, we wouldn't become fools.
Wow.
And I think that's where this humility is so important, that in everything that we learn, it's leading us to worship the Lord. And as we go through some of those things, that's our heart. Right,
because we want to look at the right fingerprints. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
we want to call them what they are.
Yeah, but we don't necessarily want to focus on man's fingerprints. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's find God's fingerprints.
But like, for example, I've heard people who aren't believers say that when they look at the universe and the solar system, and they know that we're like made up of stardust, and it makes them feel very small and insignificant. And it can be pretty depressing because you land at a place where it's futility. Yeah. Like, what's the point? Finite. Why does it even matter what I do? If I look at the scope of the universe, how huge it is, consider how deep the ocean is, how complex, it makes me feel less significant if I don't put it into the context that it should lead me to feel God's greatness. Like, that is what looking up at the stars or at the endless ocean should lead me to the eternity that is God. Like, these things give us a taste of eternity. Yeah. And we don't want to miss that, you know? Yes. So yeah, let's have some fun. So we're going to just point out some things, and, Roger's like, I'm just going to let you nerd out, Liz. And I don't want to be so nerdy that it's not going to be of any interest to anybody.
My level of nerdiness is like pretty simple. It's like going a walk, see some like cool things, and I'm blown away. Like, I'm very simple. Like, I just took a missions trip to Bolivia with a group of Bible college students from our church here. Yeah. And in my heart, I'm praying like to see cool birds. Me and the pastor down there love getting up early, and like, we have this app
comment if you have a bird app like Roger.
Yeah, it's or like animals, right? So like, I got to see cool monkeys. Yep. Right there. Fascinating. Amazing toucans, these birds with a beak almost larger than their body. I'm like, how do you fly? Yeah. And then you know what I saw for the first time? A sloth. And they are really slow. It's for real. It's these guys. And their faces are, it is just amazing. He was on the fence. We're like going out to the city. And then like one of the Bible college students, Ben, was like, a sloth. And I come to find out this was Ben's prayer. I'm not joking.
He wanted to see a sloth?
He wanted to see a sloth. He had heard that Bolivia has sloths and that they're there. And we were staying in a part that could potentially really have them. And there he ran out of the car, taking pictures, and there it was hanging there. So, all right, so God's fingerprints.
And that's the thing is there's no belittling of the child's wonder and the simple things. That's the point. Like, let's enjoy nature. Let's enjoy every moment that leads you to worship. Take it.
And isn't it to be enjoyed? Like, that's such a good point.
That's the point. That's
like,
what it's there for.
It would be shame on us for like letting it pass by, you know, like not be noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So that I think, and what we're really talking about is beauty. And that is one thing that I think is a very clear encouragement that God is in creation is, first of all, that there is a desire in us to see beauty and to enjoy beauty. We appreciate beauty. You don't see animals lifting up their heads and like soaking in the sunset. They're not doing that. They're just like munching away. But we do. We lift up our eyes and we see beauty, and it touches us in a way that is very hard to quantify. We recently listened to a great debate between an atheist and a believer who's a well-known scientist, and the atheist was the one who said, beauty in the universe, beauty in nature is one of the things that is hardest for me to ignore when I think about arguments for God.
Yeah, he conceded. He still wrestling
because, you know, there's this moment, like you mentioned, looking up at the ocean, and there's something in you that pulls, and it's almost an ache. It's almost a painful thing when we see something beauty. We say that it's achingly beautiful because there's something in us that's being like pulled on, and we can't. You take a picture and you look at the picture and you're like, I didn't get it, didn't capture it. Try to do a painting, try to write a song.
It's not quite the same.
It can't get it.
Yeah.
And this is like a taste of God himself. Like, he is so beautiful, and that is where we're going to end up in eternity with him. It's like this. It's like another sense of eternity. And I think that's a lot when I think about science. It's like whenever we hit up against where knowledge ends, that's where like we're meeting eternity. That's where like we're meeting God. And you can't quite like wrap yourself around it. And those are some of the things we want to talk about today, are those kind of moments, whether it's in science, in what we know, or just in creation. So one of those things for sure is the fact that the universe, as what when A.W. Tozer said, that we had come to expect orderliness. There is an orderliness to the universe, meaning it's predictable. There is a design, and we see that like in constants that are in the universe. We've already talked quite a bit about light in various episodes that we've done, the nature of light. If you want to go back and watch those, please do. It's really amazing to think about the nature of light. So we won't talk too much about it, but that is one. The speed of light is constant. It is a constant in the entire universe. It never changes. And light has no mass. It is this thing that is phenomenal. It is extraordinary. It does not really fit into the universe, but it's like the reason that the universe can even possibly exist. So it's very divine in its nature. So that's one thing, is just when there's a constant, there's a law, there's a predictability.
Yes.
The sense of that there's something that you can trust. You can lean back and know it's always going to be there.
Right. And so you would say that's a fingerprint.
Yeah.
That's a clue.
Yeah.
That's like waiting to be really like followed and discovered.
Yeah.
Not like fully understood,
and appreciated.
But like, like, hey, look at that. I can see that it doesn't change.
Yeah.
You know, like I was on the other side when I went to South America. I was on the southern hemisphere of the globe.
Yeah.
And for me, it was just so wild to be like, it's 100 degrees in December.
Yeah. We had a snowstorm.
And yet that really resonated with the constant that is the axis of the earth and the way it revolves around the sun and its time creating the seasons.
It's so predictable.
And each hemisphere having different seasons.
Yeah. Based
upon its axis. And that to me, isn't that amazing?
It's like, really cool. Yeah. Seasons are predictable. Yeah. And there's order. And I asked our 13-year-old, what do you think? What are some fingerprints? And she just said like cycles. She mentioned like cycles, like, you learn about the water cycle and just the fact that the earth is like this closed system. And yet it it's renewing always. The water cycle is one of those. It's this just beautiful, elegant cycle and system that we rely on. We don't even realize, like, long before we discovered these things, they were there and sustaining life and giving us the opportunity to breathe. Amazing. And it's just like so beautiful to consider that God fine-tuned the universe for us to live in. And that term fine-tuning is like very, we use that in apologetics as a great argument for the existence of God. Is this fine-tuning. And we're not going to get into all of those, but you can, there's plenty of YouTube videos and stuff, but it's incredible how fine-tuned, how carefully designed our planet is for life.
Yes.
And cycles like seasons and all of those are a huge part of that. So it's just really cool. But another one that I really love, and I'm not a math person. I don't like math. So if you don't like math, that's okay. You can still enjoy this.
You can appreciate it.
You can appreciate math. Math is really the language of the universe. And again, this speaks to order and that it's predictable, it's trustworthy. And these are words we use for God. Unchanging, infinite, constant. And math is God's language for the universe. We see how music is based on math. Patterns and frequencies, sounds like waves of sound. Yeah. All of these are mathematical things. And they're not unique to the human being or to the planet Earth even. Math and how it applies is universal.
Yeah.
And that's why when you play Uno, you can play Uno with anybody. You don't have to speak the same language because math is universal.
That's a great point.
We learned that on the mission field. Uno is a great one. Everyone knows
brings everyone together.
Color and everyone knows numbers. So mathematics is really beautiful because it's the predictability, it's the orderliness that the universe is built on.
Right.
And then what we see even more incredible than that is what I've heard termed the language of life, and that's DNA. So I'm a molecular biologist and microbiologist, and DNA is something that we have only recently, it was in the 50s and 60s that we started to really, Watson and Crick got what is the structure, the double helix.
Yeah, they located it.
This is where I don't know how nerdy to get, but DNA, guys, it is worth nerding out about. You can't oversell DNA. It is so incredible. And what's so amazing about DNA is, again, it's not human or like, fish have a certain type of DNA and then bacteria have a certain type of DNA.
That's a good point.
And then humans, we all have the same language.
So you're saying in a plant,
it's
in
all
an
the
alligator,
same. We have, the bases, A, T, C, G, right, that connect, and then form amino acids, and then amino acids in certain order create proteins, the building blocks of life. We have all used the same language. God, across the spectrum.
Wow.
Whether you're a fish or you're a human or you're a rose, when you get to the very center of each cell, there is the same DNA. And it expresses itself in all the incredible variety that you see on the planet. But it really is God showing off. And it took us a long time to even know about it. We were able to just enjoy God in nature, see the predictability of the seasons.
Yeah,
those are things for millennia
things.
As humans, we have been able to thank God for that. Thank you that we know when to harvest. We know when to plant. Thank you that we know that the rain comes.
Yeah, the storm is coming.
These are things we could always worship God for. But DNA, it's like I feel like he was just so excited for when we were going to get to
He kind of saved DNA. The best for last in a way. I mean, I don't want to say the last, but you know what I mean?
Like, there are those who explore like the cosmos, and many of them are believers or theists at the very least. And it's because it's so humbling and so beautiful. And it's so vast. It's so big. But what's even more amazing to me, at least, is that the smaller that you get, the closer that you look.
On the micro level.
Yeah, but the closer that you look on the microscopic, cellular, and now atomic level that we're getting to, it's more and more breathtaking. It's incredible. The working of a cell is, again, so predictable. They work like little machines, and they work very well.
Yeah.
And DNA is at the very heart of it. I can put a DNA sequence that is for a human protein that is useless to bacteria, and I can put it into a bacterial cell, give it to it. Here you go. It's never seen it before, and it can make that protein from that DNA.
Like copy it, you mean?
Yeah, you insert it in there. It's called recombinant DNA. You put it in that bacteria, let it use all its built-in functions to replicate DNA, and it will produce that protein that it's never seen before and it has absolutely no use for. And then you can go and take that protein and use it to treat, cancer or, it's a growth hormone, whatever it could be.
Wow.
Sky's the limit, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're seeing now.
But that's what I used to do in my lab. That's why I know a little too much about that. But it's so cool that DNA is God's language for life. Yes. So there's math is the language for like structure and order in the universe. But when we're talking about living things, DNA is the same.
Yeah.
And it is God's language. And it is like the most complex thing that we have been taking for granted for millennia.
Right.
We've just been like real happy to be alive.
And it wasn't until like 10, 20 years ago that when did we officially map the human genome?
Yeah, that was in the 80s.
The 80s, early 90s, right?
80s and 90s.
It was like a 10-year process.
Which doesn't mean we understand the human genome.
No,
it just means that we've mapped it.
We've like...
Yeah.
We've gotten the top.
Okay, I feel like I've said enough about DNA, but isn't that amazing? Like, that's incredible.
It is. It's so great to think about. And really, what is it saying? Like, you touched on music, and isn't it, when I think about it in simple terms, and I think about like the book of Psalms, like it's a way where God's left his fingerprints to allow us to connect with him, right? Like ultimately he's left the trail, he's left the trace behind, not so that we would forget him, that we would get lost, that we would just turn our own way. He's left this trail so that we could connect with him.
Yeah.
That we could talk to him. Like Psalm 8:4. Yeah. What is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man, that you would, be with him, talk to him, know him, reveal yourself to him. That's amazing. Like he clearly did this out of love. And I was thinking, like, when it comes to music, for example, we see that these fingerprints, God's kind of like handiwork, they were to help us with certain things. Yeah. Like music, it's...
Yeah, let's pause. Like, what is music? It's sound.
Yeah.
That affects us. Well, like, it's just sound waves, right? Like tapping and things. This is just sound in the universe. But music is like organized, structured sound that affects us. It can bring a person to tears.
Right. It moves us emotionally. It's also it's very, like, I would say in a way, like it's helped us to combat like negativity or opposition. Like we see in the Bible that like the music in the New Old Testament was like used to like bring God in. Like Exodus 15, when they crossed the Red Sea, they sang a song. They rejoiced. Like music was in a way of translating like Uno, you said, to the one who doesn't know, it has now become universal. Yeah. And so music really, I think we overlook at it because maybe in our day and age, it's kind of been like muddied or like dirtied a little bit. Yeah. Like when I lived in Finland for a little bit, I learned to have appreciation for classical music. And like, I always thought it was just like this thing for a certain group of people. Yeah. But then I learned and realized those who wrote that music and those who composed that music and played that music were those of faith. Those that appreciated and humbled themselves before God, the Almighty God. Yeah. And they explained to me that music was their way of communicating with God, with understanding God and glorifying him, right? Like there was So for me, that was very eye-opening. I think isn't that the point of these fingerprints being left?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And kind of it's like, thank God you did that.
And that's why I can get a little bit bummed out and grieved when I see science being weaponized against God. Because science at its best is like man's humble attempt to know God and to search for truth.
Right. Like they're on the same side, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
But for sure, the godless world, the God of this age is trying to divide those two.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And that's why I lean into my nerdiness when it comes to sharing about the Bible, because I think that God wants us to enjoy the wonder that comes from that search for truth, looking at things a little bit more closely, but with a sense of appreciation and worship, So when I consider DNA, yes, I want to learn the ins and outs and the specifics and how it can be used to help cure diseases or better understand all types of things. But at the same time, it is always like bringing me to my knees before God. Yeah. Like, this is amazing, What's
another one that you found to be like a fingerprint of God that really like stood out to you? Remember you found a couple others.
Well, I think there's a documentary on Netflix that's called A Trip to Infinity.
Oh, yes.
And this is a documentary that is discussing and considering the concept. It's a mathematical construct that is infinity. And we know that symbol, which is just that, just never ending. And this concept, the documentary is kind of cool because they're interviewing mathematicians and physicists who are at the cutting edge, at the cusp of their fields. And by the end of the documentary, they sound like philosophers.
Yeah, right.
Because what infinity is, when I looked it up, it's something that's larger than a natural number. So you've got there's 120,000 of this and 1,000,000 of this. We have numbers that we use. But in mathematics and in calculus and physics, they use the concept or the construct of infinity because there is a sense that there is infinite possibilities. It is a principle and an idea that is applicable in life while it's still being out of our reach. It's out of our grasp. When we think about infinity, we can't really get to it. If there's an infinite number of something, we can't really wrap our heads around that.
Right.
So I loved this documentary because these are, of course, incredibly intelligent, capable people. Most of them, I assume, not Christians. But by the end of this, they sounded spiritual.
They're kind of crying out. I remember one of the mathematicians was like, you can't get my arms around it.
Yeah, you cannot wrap your arms around it.
What a visual.
One of them was like, infinity is like an emotion that you feel. They were very philosophical, and it's because it's like when science reaches the end of itself, where it can't explain it, that's where people start to wax spiritual and philosophical, and they start to say, if there's something infinite, that's God. Yeah. That's divine.
Yes.
And maybe they don't land on the God of the Bible,
that's
but
a good word. Divine is a good word, right?
Yes.
I think to express.
And when you think about infinity, for example, there's infinite, the biggest number, and then you can add one more. You can always add one more for infinity. You can't stop adding one more. Yeah. So there's no end to what could be in that number. And then also when you consider decimals, if you divide a whole, you could just keep dividing it and dividing it and dividing it and dividing it infinitely. And theoretically, because in nature, you can only splice a piece of pie so many times. How many times can I cut a piece of pie before it's just a mess? So that's where, in reality, we hit that limit.
Right.
But theoretically, I could just keep going into atomic level and then even smaller and smaller and smaller, infinitely small. So I love this concept of infinity in that it's like the fact that we've hit up against something that we cannot explain, that to me is a fingerprint.
Wow.
That's God being
That's a great way to define it, isn't it?
Yeah.
When I come up against something I cannot explain, that's the question. That's the moment when we should ask the question, is this God? Is this God saying something to me? You know, like, is this God reaching out to me? You know, and I think, wouldn't it be good that we should like seek for this, like this very experience, like to
develop that curiosity.
Yeah, like, I think as adults, we talked a little earlier about children and like their curiosity. And they were mentioning like how like we can't lose the wonder. Like what would be ways, you know, like you're saying these things because of your science background have brought great joy to you. But like, let's just say maybe I don't have a science background. Maybe I'm just, you know, in this field or that field, or I'm at this age and that age. What would be some things that would inspire me? You know, like what would you suggest? Like,
well, I mean,
where would I start?
I mean, you made it clear at the beginning, just enjoying nature for what it is, like seeing beauty as an opportunity to worship in all of creation. You know, people live in different parts of the world. Some people are in the mountains, some people are at the beach. But the point is that creation is meant to bring us to our knees before God. You don't have to be a scientist looking into the structure of the atom to be brought to your knees. Right. But that is the ultimate goal of our search for truth, especially as believers, is to bring us to God. It brings us to him. And what is our response? It's always worship. It's always wonder. So if we are lacking that in our lives, you don't have to go and get a degree in science. Right. But,
you could,
but it open yourself up to maybe there's some things in your life you need to adjust. And, you know, you mentioned leaving your phone at home and going for a walk so that you have the chance to look up. I mean, okay, I do love thinking about the structure of DNA, but you know, when we go by a beautiful tree, my kids know. I'm like, guys, that is look at that tree. There's such a gorgeous tree. And my kids, you know, they like laugh because they know that mom just loves a good tree, you know? It's my screensaver is when I looked up and it was all the red leaves and then the blue sky. And I'm just looking up at a tree and that leads me to worship. Yeah. So that's really the goal of creation, is it glorifies God, and we with creation glorify him. And
maybe in the simplest way would be like you've said this a lot, I've heard already from just this little bit of time, looking up. Like looking up is something that I think in our culture right now in this day and age we're not doing. Yeah. Like we're looking down, we're looking inward, we're looking to this or that. We're
distracted or we're asleep.
Yeah, and we're not aware. We are asleep, and in a ways, it's like it's right in front of us. It's right under our nose in that way of speaking. Like, look up. You know, like when I went on this trip, this missions trip in Bolivia, because I was in the southern hemisphere, I got to see Jupiter. And Jupiter's very close in the southern hemisphere to the moon. And that's how it's located at the certain time of year, December in the summer, southern hemisphere of the world. You can see Jupiter. Wow. And I learned a little bit about it from a couple of the people down there and the Pastor Stan. And it was very cool to like think for a moment, like when I just took a step outside and looked and saw Jupiter, it's very large. You know, it's like clearly not a star, it's a planet. And its proximity and that measurement, like it's very, it's just very calculated. It's very precise. It's right there. And for us to have known that and for us to just acknowledge it in that moment and that breath really revived me. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like that just maybe like in a way, like it takes the scales off. Like,
well, and I think too, like life is hard, like our individual situations, our circumstances, financial, family, health, there's hardship in our lives and there's pain and there is suffering, and creation is an opportunity. Again, I love this idea of looking up Because as believers, when we look up, whether it's at this, into the cosmos, into the sky, or we look up into the microscope, it's an opportunity for us to find our place in God's universe. And we're not lost and insignificant and meaningless and without purpose. We are not just hurtling through space for no reason.
Yeah.
We have a place in God's universe, and whatever we are going through in our individual practical lives, the struggles and the real hardships, creation is always an opportunity for, I will lift my eyes to the hills where my help comes from.
Yes.
And be comforted. So I think it's worship and it's comfort. It gives us peace.
Yeah.
And that's just God's kindness to us, that no matter where we are, just, yesterday morning in this frigid cold, we went out to the car to go to school, and the car was covered in crystal.
Yeah.
Because it hadn't snowed, but it was so cold that there were these little individual crystals that had formed, and it looked like someone had bedazzled our car. That's what my 11-year-old said. And just the structure of crystals, the symmetry and the beauty, in a moment, it doesn't change the fact that we're running late and I'm worried about this or that, but it can give me a moment to take a breath and bring myself before God and find myself in His universe,
Yeah.
And so just to wrap this up, the last thing we wanted to talk about that is, I think, the most miraculous thing when we think about seeing God in creation, that is the conception of a human being. The creation of a soul, that when two people come together and an egg is fertilized, there is something that happens that creates a soul. And it's incredible. This is something, it is commonplace. It's ordinary. There are people being born every moment of the day in the world. And it is the most miraculous, mind-blowing thing.
Eternity like winks.
Like you're looking for a miracle. The way that a baby is formed and it's in the womb of a mother is a miracle, and it happens so often that we can miss it. And I think that's true of all creation. That's what we're saying. We're saying, don't miss this. That flower might seem ordinary, but don't miss that the symmetry and the beauty, the way it speaks to you, don't miss it.
And isn't that such like an attack of the world?
Yeah.
To minimize and dilute and really just
dismiss,
cancel out. Yeah. Dismiss, like even having children. Do you know what I mean? Like I have an employee who's going to have a baby, and we are so excited. And the only reason why I'm excited is because I've had the privilege to see it happen. And I think that's such an encouragement to all of us out there. Like find someone who's in this, find someone who's just experienced this. Get around someone who's even had a newborn, and man, doesn't it revive you?
Yeah.
Like, come on. I mean, the joy that comes, from sorrow to joy, like Jesus said, that there is something so wonderful about being like admitting that God knitted the human being, a soul in the mother's womb, and it just releases, I think, a potential and a power that is only going to revive us. And I think that's maybe one of the takeaways I have from this discussion is that like God's fingerprints seen in a humble way will revive the soul.
Yeah.
Bring joy to our soul.
Yeah.
And that's what we need, don't we?
I mean, absolutely.
That's what the devil doesn't want that. But then here we have the Lord breaking through the clouds, the Lord breaking through the scene of this world, wherever you are. Like it doesn't matter the city, its population, its all the different dynamics and things that are there. God is breaking through. He's mindful of man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is all the time that we have. We'll end with Psalm 19, since we never read it, but it is beautiful words from David. And that is that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. So creation speaks, and let's listen. Let's hear
That's
it.
such a good promise.
Let's have ears to hear.
Wow.
So thanks for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed this week. Don't forget to subscribe, share these episodes with your friends, and be encouraged. And tune in next week.